I'm very pleased to welcome you to this session, and so I will introduce only the rules of this session. That is a research with session, and this session is for a discussion with some speakers. They do not have to present anything, but they only have to discuss with us and to answer to our question. So I think the main answer and question will be with the jury, the members of the jury. Barbara Antonioli from the University of Lugano. So thank you, Barbara, to come here. Claire Berensley from the Denmark Technical University. Pierre-Olivier Pinault from Montreal School of Management, and I from the University of Grenoble. So we are very pleased to discuss with you, all the speakers. We saw all your research drills, and so we will have a brief answer and question and answer discussion. I think we will discuss only 10 minutes with each speaker. And I propose if other persons that are in the session wants to ask to speakers, they could use the chat, or they could use the reactions button to hands up, and I give the floor to some other question rather than the members of the jury. So I think we could begin with, I propose to follow the order of the research with session. So I think we could begin with some questions to Juliette Kettler from the University of St. Gallen. And hi, Juliette. So for the members of the jury who wants begin to ask to Juliette, I propose 1 or 2 questions, and after we could follow with the other members of the jury. So Barbara, Pierre-Olivier, Claire, or I, if you want.
I'll ask the first question. Okay. Go ahead, Barbara.
I follow the alphabetic order, so to me, usually I'm the first because Barbara Antonioli was the first.
Yes, A.B., you're the first.
Yeah, A.B. So, okay. Thank you for, can I see the speaker? Oh, okay, I didn't see Juliette. Okay, I appreciate your work. That is a master thesis, if I remember rightly.
Yes.
And, okay, thank you. We are both Swiss, I think. So we are both interested from the law on the CO2 taxation that will be the next time. So one of my questions is clearly about this topic. First of all, in your paper, in your thesis, you at the beginning, so correct me if I'm not clear or I'm not right, you mentioned that you only consider environmental aspects in your thesis. This is the starting point. So I mean, and you outline different scenarios, and according to each scenario, you sketch out the measures and strategies in order to reach several goals. My first question is, how did you choose different scenarios? You are considering what are, I don't know, strategies, energy strategies, other ideas, no idea. How did you? So the first is, how did you choose the scenario? And the second one is how your conclusion might changes according to the next CO2 taxation proposal that will be discussed on next Sunday, if they might change, for example. No.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question and the interest as well. So first I'd like to say that the scenarios, they're not meant to be the two most likely ones. Or like they're based on the interviews, the expert interviews that I conducted, and there it really, when talking with the persons or with the experts, it was clear that some are either in one group kind of very conservative and very pessimistic about environmental action, and others were rather, it is a possibility that there will be action, we just have to take the action. So it was really two groups of experts that emerged, like of positions, and there were always the same arguments. Also in the industry reports that I've read, there's always the dimension policy, there's always the dimension consumer technology, and what actions the airlines themselves take. I think those were the main ones. So I just grouped the interview statements as well, and kind of what they said in those dimensions, and then I formed those two scenarios as kind of a reference point, but it is more an inspiration as well. It's two out of possible scenarios. I just looked that they are internally somewhat consistent, and then those were a basis for the two strategies. I think those were also for the strategy recommendations from the experts or also from the literature, and they always dated back to one of those two basic assumptions of how those dimensions will evolve. Does this answer the first question?
Yeah, okay.
And concerning the second questions on the CO2 initiative or law that we will be voting on Sunday, I think I'm very much in favor of it. I think because it it has that flight tax that we need, or ticket tax that we just need. Of course, you can discuss the aviation industry would prefer that it is fully invested back into, for example, synthetic fuels, or just in making aviation more sustainable, which I fully understand. However, I think I'm more a realistic person in the sense, or have a more realistic view in the sense that if it would go back fully into aviation, then it wouldn't be voted, or people wouldn't vote for it. And so I see that there is has to be a social aspect in it with this Lenkungsabgabe, so that it goes back to the public. And also I think it is legitimate to also invest some of it back into other forms of mobilities, for example, trains, not only aviation. So I think so that's why I'm in favor of it. If it would get rejected, I think there would still be some policy support for synthetic fuel possible, but it would of course be interesting to see how policy, because Simonetta Sommaruga has voiced her interest, or that they are in favor of synthetic fuel, they have to support it. It's just then not clear how they would do it concretely.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juliette, for all these answers. Cynthia Olivier, if you
want. Just a question. You mentioned your interviews, but you don't mention how you reached out to these people. So, and then you don't provide lots of information on who you interviewed. So can you elaborate a little bit on how you reach out to the group of people and who they were?
So I didn't specify all groups because some were anonymous, so some didn't want to be named, some groups, but the basic approach was that I have representatives of different stakeholders. So that's there's someone from policy from the federal office. There are 3 people from the Swiss itself. Then there is someone from an investment perspective. Then several industry experts, just who kind of have who are consultancies, and I reached out to the people often because of also from recommendations from my advisors who work from the Aviation Institute as well. So that's how I found like the industry experts. But I also took care to kind of just, when I read through articles about aviation and making it sustainable in Switzerland, sometimes just prominent figures kept popping up. So I also approached those. For example, there's one committee that actively advocates for sustainability in aviation in Switzerland, for the ticket tax, for a regulation, and we also, since this was kind of a project of several master theses about sustainable aviation, so we also sometimes shared interviews, and that's also, for example, how we then approached someone from another institute who develops the institute that originally developed synthetic fuels, or like the prototype that's standing in Zurich. So I think like somehow like a pestle framework somehow was in mind, of kind of trying to get from all different stakeholder groups at least one expert.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Claire, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, do we still have a little bit of time?
Yes.
Thank you. Actually, yeah, I think it was at the end of your expose, you said this one thing that really got me curious. And I think that you mentioned that one of the future development that you foresee in the sector is some kind of substitution between flights for short distances and the use of rail. And this is where I got curious, actually, about the scope now. So what did you have in mind? That the aviation sector will diversify and enter into this rail market? Or are you thinking about new collaboration between different actors, you know, finding some synergies there? Or were you just thinking about just the rail actors taking over some market share from the aviation? So what is the scope there?
So the suggestion in my thesis is that an airline diversifies and also enters, or kind of in the form of partnerships first, so that they kind of, for example, Swiss, Lufthansa and Austrian airlines, that they, with the three respective rail companies, that they together build this platform of mobility as a service, like of this multimodal platform for these three countries. So this is with partnerships, and so that the idea behind it is that they don't lose the share to the rail companies, and the rail companies also like get access to this share, because airlines make it easier for customers coming from long haul flights than to switch to rail instead of taking another short haul flight to reach their final destination. So they're kind of synergies that are exploited with the strategy. We don't see it currently. I have so far not seen an airline that proposed this, but it's just, it is on purpose a bit like disruptive, but I think it's what the industry needs to just think a bit out of the box and not see themselves solely as an airline, but just as a mobility provider, and then kind of think what other business models there are. But I mean, my proposal is a rough sketch. I think the whole master thesis or doctorate thesis could be written about how such a business model could look like.
Thank you. Did you have the opportunity to talk to the rail actors about this idea?
No, because it developed only after I conducted the interviews, so I didn't have the opportunity, but I would be very interested. Although also in the interviews, a lot of experts or people from the aviation industry at least said that there are to some degree, there are a lot of cultural kind of similarities between the rail and aviation, but still also significant differences. So I think from a cultural change management perspective, it would be also quite a leap to merge, but it will be possible. That was kind of the feeling that I got.
Thank you, Juliette. Perhaps one more question. I want to know if your objective in this paper and in your PhD is to draw a roadmap for for aviation or for Swiss Air or for other aircraft companies. I was wondering, what kind of literature or methodology do you think you could use to analyze all your data?
Sorry, what kind of, what method?
Literature or literature. Yeah. Okay.
So what kind of literature did I use to analyze the data?
Yeah.
So like the...
Just perhaps only one question. What is your objective? Do you want to draw a roadmap for Swiss Air, for example? And I think we could forget the question on the literature and on the use of the literature to manage your data. So
okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, the ultimate goal, like the motivation as well for the thesis, was to develop this roadmap, because it is also several sources and institutions point out that the current strategy, they are following a strategy, a comprehensive strategy, the aviation industry as a whole, but it's just not enough. It's like the ultimate goal is to halve emissions by 2050 in respect to 2005 levels, and it's just, it has to be net zero if we want to reach a Paris Agreement. So the motivation was to kind of develop something really practitioner oriented, something very concrete on what measures should be done and what steps can you take, and kind of not stay in this abstract definition of those would be possible ways, but really focus on one case and see where are obstacles in this country, what political measures can be done, what capabilities need to be built, and also kind of yeah, this rough roadmap, yeah, that you developed. I think this was the ultimate goal, but having really a scientific basis also for the definition of what is sustainability. And yeah, I had to make quite a few limitations as well, as by focusing on climate change as well. I mean, noise and everything and the social impact is a whole other subject. But how do they get net neutral by 2050 was the motivation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Juliette. I think we will close with this first discussion. So thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
And we could pass with Stéphanie's Schasché. I'm sorry, perhaps I do not pronounce correctly your name, so sorry. And I have a strong French accent, so I'm really sorry.
You weren't doing so bad. It's Schasché, which maybe some years ago used to be a French surname anyhow. But it's been Germanized or Austrianized. Hello to everybody.
Hi, Stéphanie. So from the University of Klagenfurt. Yeah. So I don't know if you want, we continue with this order, Barbara, Pierre-Olivier, Claire, and I, or we could change if you want. I could begin. Pierre-Olivier, you could begin, because Barbara is always AB.
Please, I give you the floor.
So, Pierre-Olivier, do you want to begin this time?
Yeah, so let's do so the first one will turn. So the first one next will be Claire and then Cedric, and then we turn around like that so that we don't ask the question every time.
Good idea.
Thank you, Stéphanie. Very interesting topic. I just have a general question. Demand responsive transport, is that just a fancy name for taxi and carpooling? I don't really define what is DRT. So can you just elaborate a little bit? And you know, there are so many buzzwords these days. So what did you include in DRT?
Yes, I can certainly. Well, although I cannot really, because even the definition that most authors base their explanation of this form of public transport is rather vague. Most of them go back to Ambrosino, which is an author who wrote an article in 2004 stating that demand responsive transport services are a form of a public transport, strictly reacting on demand. So the only thing in common, all these very flexible in their service designs and in their scheduling and routing forms of public transport, they have one thing in common, and that is they act only if somebody books them.
Only if somebody, what?
Somebody books them. So
books them.
That makes a difference to the classic public transport, because even with a flight, you can go to the airport and you can buy the ticket and you can hop on the airplane and travel.
Okay, so basically it would be saying it's taxi and Uber type, it's fine.
It's not exactly the same thing because it's a shared, firstly it's shared. And secondly, it still mostly does have routes and stopping points. You cannot stop everywhere, most of them. Okay. The way I found it defined was that it's a part of mobility as a service.
Okay, okay.
Like a subgroup.
Okay, well, so it would have helped me to better understand that, because in your I know, you know, it's very limited short period of time, but you know, DRT, there are so many acronyms and new names, so we cannot be familiar with everything. So, well, thank you very much for this clarification.
You're welcome. I hope it helped.
So, Claire, do you have a question, or I could ask to Stephanie if you want?
I have something, but maybe it would be jumping. Let's get there. Okay, so yeah, I think it was actually a very good question from Pierre-Olivier to get it clear what we are actually looking into. So now I understand also better your object, your research object. So you're looking into shared, probably electricity-based transport.
I'm sorry, just the last part of the sentence I didn't catch.
Shared cars, shared electric cars.
Oh, no, there's always a driver. There's always a driver, and you always need to book the service. And it's not an electric car per se.
Okay. Then I also got confused.
I know it's really not it's not really defined clearly, but it pops up more and more often as a potential solution for public transport, especially in rural areas, where most buses simply, you cannot get them full because there's a low population density there, and then also it's very price intensive to keep the service running. So maybe that's the best way to define it. And then still you have the possibility to sometimes go routes, and in other time spans pick up directly.
Okay, so maybe this is going to be a follow-up to Pierre-Olivier's question. I mean, I come from the electricity side, so if you talk about demand response, I think about flexibility in time. But I believe that what you're referring to is more some kind of a flexibility of usage using a spatial dimension, right? Yes. So increasing the capacity of transportation when there is a need at some place on a given route, regardless. I mean, okay, time is a variable there. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll let Cedric jump in.
So thank you to both of you. So I have two questions. If you don't understand my English, Stephanie, do not hesitate to tell me. Repeat, please, Cedric. Repeat, please. I come from the south of France, so it's hard to my English speaking, my strong French accent. So I was wondering if in your analysis, do you use some econometrics methodology to see if some variable are you could find in the literature are very important when you design the demand response transportation issue. So I had in mind that as you made a literature review, perhaps you could have in mind to do a meta-analysis of all the literature you read. And so you could perhaps define some variables that are common in several papers. And so you could continue with this kind of analysis using econometrics, and you could threaten, I think, perhaps some results when you could put in light some variables that are very important and others less important. So this is my first question. And I think in France, we have this kind of demand response transportation, because if I understand correctly, because it's not my field of research, but when you have some cities that merge, you could have a lot of services that are implemented in each of these cities. And so I think you could have a deep offer of public transportation. And so you could have the interest to do that, because you could share the cost, and you could share more efficiently the cost of deploying these public services in transport. So I was wondering, it was the case, and if you deploy some demand response transportation, if you could do this, if you do not merge a lot of cities to share the cost.
Well, first off, I would try to shortly answer the first question that I believe that I heard. That was regarding the way I structured the literature review. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And actually, I had to do a rather broad search term, because there's not a lot of scientific research on that topic by now. So all I did was trying to find whatever there was published until now on these topics, because besides demand responsive transport services, there's other terms like microtransit, microbus, flexible public transport, adaptive public transport. So I collected all these different namings, which maybe also makes a scientific approach to that topic a little more difficult in the end. But unfortunately, very similar is also the operation of these services, because mostly they act just like an island solution. So there might be a part of a city operating a demand responsive transport solution, but it's isolated from the next one. And as you mentioned, it would be very smart, and it for sure would also lift the occupancy rates, in my opinion, to integrate them with each other, but also with the rest of the public transport network, especially for maybe suburban regions, or even go a little more rurally and away from urban regions, to still be able to provide public transport there. Because as a matter of fact, at the time being, public transport in rural areas is rather a sad thing, if you need it. I'm sorry to put it that frankly. But yes, I believe there would be a very good idea, even to maybe propose to future operations. But at the time being, they're rather isolated, unfortunately. I hope that was an answer to your question.
Yeah, yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
So I got it there.
Okay. Thank you. So, do you want to close with?
Just a short question. In your presentation, you say that there is some kind of bias related to the fact that they are the actual current studies just consider the current users and not the potential ones. What do you mean? How can you how you could be possible to select new potential users for your analysis?
Yes, what I meant with that is that on the one side, people expect demand responsive transport service to be public transport for the general public, so for everybody. But then on the other hand, empiric research and empiric studies target people who are already users. So what happens is that they already have a satisfying offer. Maybe they live close to a station, maybe they are good by foot, they don't have any small children to accompany, or whatever other factors there might be hindering for the use of such novel public transport service in rural areas. Might be left aside if you transfer these results onto the potential users. That's what I meant. I hope that clarifies. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I forgot to ask to the audience if someone want to ask a question to speakers, to the two previous speakers. So, okay, no question from the audience. So I think we could continue. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for your answer. Thank you. So I think we could continue with Axel Bruck from the University of Canarias.
Hey.
Hi, Axel. So, Claire, could you begin to ask questions to Axel?
I'm the starter now, yes. Well, thank you, first of all, Axel, for your video poster. Do we have a special name for the research material today, for your short video about positive energy district, and where and why it was the most suitable solution, or where it had the most potential in Europe? Yeah, I had a few questions on your work. Do you consider, or do you plan to consider building types? Because if I remember correctly, you take, I mean, I didn't list what you're looking into, but I believe you're looking into the level of demand and probably of local production, right? But are you looking into building types? And if not, why not? And also, I was a bit unsure about something. Do you only look into electricity, or do you look into other energy sources, such as heat, for instance? And if not, why not?
Yeah, like regarding the building type question, I will probably look into different building types, but maybe at a later stage. Right now, I will probably assume similar building types over Europe. But that is definitely a point that I want to look into, because yeah, there is definitely different building types across Europe. And for example, right now I did a study where I compare like a rural and a urban positive energy district, and even there's already a big difference in terms of building types. And regarding the energy question, like which types of energy I would encompass, there at the moment I did a study where I only encompass electricity, because it is focused on the Canary Islands, where the climatic conditions are super good and not many people use heating, and the only heating is done for domestic hot water. And that is usually done with an electric boiler, here on the Canaries at least, and also no cooling is required. But so far I have extended the mixed integer linear programming model, so I could also include heating and cooling demands or load profiles. And for this specific research question or paper that I was, idea I was presenting in that research reel, I definitely want to include those three energy types to exactly see, for example, how sector coupling of electricity, heating, and cooling could favor, or maybe also not favor, the PD concept, the positive energy district concept.
And as a very quick follow-up, what are you trying? I mean, what are you looking at? Are you trying to minimize the cost for a certain district to be provided in energy, or to get revenues maybe from flexibility services? So are you looking at this district cost, or are you looking at the CO2 impact? And how do you consider being the best solution?
Well, the optimization framework considers the cost, like it it maximizes the net present value over 20 years. But yeah, it definitely considers other factors, for example, CO2 emissions. I can, for example, integrate a CO2 cap, a CO2 cost, or for example, a limit on the power exchange to like not strain the grid, to like kind of limit the grid exchange in terms of power. But it's not part of the optimization objective, basically.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Claire. So I will ask only two questions. When I saw your video, I do not understand what kind of scenario do you take when you talk about PEG and grid limit scenario. So this is a scenario that is more costly than others, and so. But I was wondering if in this scenario, as you mentioned, network, do you include in this scenario the reliability of the system, of the energy system? And if you introduce this kind of issue, you have a costly system. I think this is there is a linkage between the two, the cost and the reliability, because you include the grid into your scenario. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I do not understand exactly what is this scenario. So if you could give some explanation on it. And my second question is, I think you answer to Claire that you maximize the net present value. Okay, but your net present value is not very positive because you are a lot of cost and you do not have a lot of revenues, if I correctly remember your results. So do you have some break-even points or some explanation that could be used to perhaps have or obtain a positive net present value in your model? So there are my two questions.
Yeah, to cover the second question first.
Okay, if you want.
I compare the scenarios to a status quo scenario, which basically means I do nothing, like only buy the electricity from the grid as I did it before. And I also calculate the net present value for this non-existent project. So basically I calculate the net present value for just buying the electricity over 20 years. And this has like also a negative net present value of minus half a million euros in that case. And then the net present value of the other projects, at least the one without the grid limit, is higher, like it's less negative. Yeah. So over the years, you would save money if you compare, because you would spend it anyways, because obviously you will use electricity over those 20 years. So it looks on paper, it looks negative, but if you compare it to the status quo scenario of doing nothing, it is positive.
Okay. In absolute, you are positive.
Yes, yeah, like the cost of the project is not positive because you will still have to pay for the investment, but you pay less than you would pay if you wouldn't do anything. And yeah.
About the break-even point, so what kind of for example, public policy could you recommend to have a positive net present value? For instance, have you seen this kind of issue in your research?
What do you mean? What do you mean with what kind of policy?
When you compute your net present value, I think you take into account the investment costs, you take into account the price of electricity, the demand, the evolution of the demand, etc. And so I think as you have some negative net present value, you perhaps it could be interesting to see in these variables what kind of variables and so what kind of public policies, if you have, for instance, some retail rate or regulated tariffs, so you could propose to arrive to a positive net present value, because I understand that you compare in absolute values all your scenario, but perhaps it could be interesting to in the future to go towards some public policies or some investment that could lead to a positive net present values.
I think a positive net present value is not necessarily something that is wanted, maybe even because, for example, if you want to have a positive net present value, you would need to have really big feed-in tariffs, like really high feed-in tariffs to sell the electricity that you generate in the positive energy district for like a lot of cents per kilowatt hour. And this is maybe not even wanted, because this might hinder the increase of self-consumption, which is actually what you want. And this also, kind of brings me to your second question, where you were asking about the grid limit, because like you can achieve the positive energy balance of a district in like two different ways. For example, you can basically export a lot of electricity and import a lot of electricity, but a little bit less at like certain times, like very high power values. But you could also almost import nothing, like import very, very little and export very, very little, and consume most of the electricity that you generate yourself. And this is actually something that has a way higher value to the grid, for example. And this is what I try to enforce with this power grid limit. So I try, like in the model, I can enforce that the grid exchange does not overpass a certain amount of power. For example, in my model, I used twice the maximum power demand power over the year. And this makes it more expensive, because then the model enforces the use of battery storage. This is why it gets so much more expensive. And you can also see, I mean, now you can't see it because it's not there, but in the research reel on the graph, you can see on the composition of the net present value that this huge chunk that makes it more important is all like capex, like investment cost, and this is all battery investment, because it's still very expensive. But okay, you could also,
So, sorry, I think we have to stop our to let Barbara to ask you some question, because I think we could continue together this discussion.
So thank you.
Thank you, Axel.
No worries. Thanks for the questions.
Just a couple of questions. The first one is, in your input data, you do not consider any socioeconomic variable. Is it correct? Are they totally irrelevant to your goals, or you consider to include them in a later stage? The second one is, I was wondering about the energy communities, and I was wondering if they are similar to this kind of positive energy district? And so the other question is, do you think that there is the possibility to define an optimal size for the PED or some kind of correct border?
No, continue, sorry.
Okay. So is there the opportunity to have the definition of an optimal size for these positive energy districts? Or they are defined by the law, by the municipality, by I don't know, by as an exogenous with an exogenous approach?
Okay, to begin, maybe the first question, like what exactly would you define as a socioeconomic input?
Because I saw that in your analysis, but maybe I'm wrong, there are only technical data concerning CO2 reduction or not?
In which analysis?
Oh, but in your papers. At the beginning,
no, it's like
the third, the second, or the third, or the third slide. I see technical data.
Yeah.
And but just technical data, not anything about socioeconomical data. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, there is definitely a lot of technical data that has to go into it, like the price of the technology and all this kind of stuff, and the location, the space that is available. But could you give like an example what you would consider, like what would you be interested to be like part of the?
For example, maybe it's not relevant. The income of the people that live there.
No, that's not part of it.
Okay, because they are not relevant in your analysis.
It could be interesting, but it would not. It would maybe have, for example, an effect on the energy demand, for example, on the load demand, because maybe if you have lower income, you might consume less energy because you might be more energy poor. But so far, I haven't considered that. No.
Okay. And concerning the optimal size, the possible optimal size?
This is also, I haven't looked into that, but definitely this is something I might want to consider in a later stage. Maybe not really the optimal size, because that is maybe less interesting, but maybe more interesting, what's the optimal constitution, like depending, like, is it only residential or residential and industrial, residential, and as like kind of what are the parts of the contributors or members of this energy district? Okay. Exactly. What would be the perfect mix in terms of basically what would be the perfect demand, the load demand that would be perfectly coverable by a positive energy district, and would give also the most value to the outer distribution grid.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Thanks for the questions.
Okay, thank you, Pierre-Olivier.
Yeah, so I'll come back to the transmission aspect. Do you see any value in transmission between positive energy districts? The whole, I mean, many studies for decarbonization, deep decarbonization, they see transmission as being like core to the process. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on transmission.
So you mean transmission between two or multiple positive energy districts?
Yeah.
Yeah, that could definitely be interesting if the positive energy districts are, as I furtherly discussed, for example, with Barbara, are not the same in terms of members. Like, for example, if you have kind of two similar positive energy districts, then they might not be compatible in terms of helping each other out with transmission, because they would probably have similar behavior, like similar input and output times, or import and export times. But if it's, for example, a residential and a industrial district, then they could definitely be profiting from each other, because, for example, the residential might have peaks in the evening, while the industrial district might have peaks during the day. And apart from that, I think like the main profit would maybe be like to have transmission towards the center of the city, like that the positive energy districts are part of the suburbs and then have transmission towards the center of the cities where the demand is, or the density of the buildings or the population density is too high to achieve a positive energy district, because
And my second question is on the data that you are using or seem to be using, because you're presenting in the title, you mentioned Europe, but then your case study is for a smaller part of Europe. Are you building your model to be able to be replicated all across Europe so that you can like cover the whole continent and then find what the optimal PEDs are, or are you just designing a model for the Canary Island?
No, like what you said before, that's the plan for this work that I presented, but it's a work in progress. So in order to show some results that I've already done, I showed what I've done for the Canary Islands, because there I didn't include heating and cooling. But now I have worked further on the model and included heating and cooling. And now I want to, as you said just now, I would like to basically see where, want to divide Europe in certain zones according to, for example, the outer temperature, like the ambient temperature, heating days, cooling days, the climatic conditions, and seeing which kind of zones the positive energy district could give the most value in terms of, for example, relative reduction in primary energy use or CO2 emission reduction. I would like to. That's the plan of this work, to cover the whole European Union with it.
Okay, I have more questions on positive energy district, but I'll keep them for Luca, that is working on the same topic or closely related.
Yeah, we're actually working together.
Thank you, Pierre-Olivier. I think Jean-Pierre wants to answer one question to you.
Yes, actually, I've worked on collective self-consumption in France in 2019, when the legislation specified that all the participants should be on the secondary of the same transformer. And this implied directly the tariffs of use for the public electricity network, which actually, with the capital cost of the PV and the usage tariffs, it ended up being the same the same cost between just consuming from the grid and using collective self-consumption. So, do you take that into account in your study, or is the Canary is the geographic location that you work on more or less exempt, doesn't have a similar framework for policy and network usage cost?
No, that's actually a really important question that you raise, and I think it would be really important to when I group those zones that I want to combine within Europe, that they should have similar tariff schemes. For example, the Scandinavian parts, I guess they have kind of similar tariff schemes. But as you said, for example, in Spain, the Canary Islands don't have an own energy market. They have the same tariff as the peninsula. But they have a very they actually have a tariff that is very dynamic. Kind of, they replicate all the costs at a certain time. You don't have to choose it, but you can. And with this one, for example, it kind of embraces self-consumption. But yeah, there are different tariff schemes all over Europe. So yeah, it's a good point. And
it was more about the usage of the distribution network, because here in France, eventually what you pay in energy is 33% almost for distribution system usage, and 33% taxes and whatnot, and these add up and make it extremely difficult to make the project.
So you mean more from a business model point of view, how to make it work? Like
yeah, it's actually when the power transits on the system from one place to another and uses the distribution system, you have to pay money for it, and the end consumer pays it at the end. So I was just asking if in the Canary it's a different.
No, like it depends how you would bring this positive energy district into life. If you like say it's an energy community, or it's like completely virtual, like so it completely depends on which kind of business model you would choose in terms of how to bring it to life. But yeah, I'm not sure if I would go into that depth if I want to cover whole Europe, because that would be like substantially different, like probably all over the place.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But thanks.
So thank you very much for all these questions. I think, I'm sorry, I'm not a very good master of the time, because we sometimes I led the discussion, but I found this discussion, all these discussions. So perhaps we could hurry for the next presentation. I'm sorry for the next speakers. So we could continue with Luca Casamassima. So, hi, Luca.
Hello.
So, from the University of Vienna?
Yes.
So, I will begin with two short questions. In your presentation, I did not understand if when you talk about energy flexibility, you integrate in your analysis. I think the answer is yes, but I had this question. Do you integrate the opportunity of storage and the behavior of consumers, one of them or both of them? So this is my first question. I had a doubt. And my second question is, how do you define your 6 main skills for your PED? So you have in the literature you have 6 variables, and after you define your PED with these 6 variables. And I was wondering if do you define these main skills, these 6 main skills?
Yep. So to the first question about the flexibility, basically we're not creating a model in that paper. So we are mostly analyzing what's under research right now for positive energy districts. Flexibility is definitely one of the ways to achieve positive energy districts, absolutely, and also storage, although having an efficient building stock in the first place seems to be also just as important, if not in some cases more important, as of now, of course, because we have as heating, it's basically, I think, 80% heating and cooling in the residential sector. So until that heating and cooling becomes completely electrified, reducing as much as possible that consumption remains incredibly important and difficult. So I don't know if that really answers your first question.
Yes, this is my first question, and my second one is on your 6 variables to define PED. The 6 main variables.
Yes,
where you include some of your results in.
So basically, I think it's fairly typical to include in this kind of analysis the 3 main pillars of social, economic, and environmental aspects. I think Axel as well, he's smiling because we've had discussions on this during the writing, so that's why he's smiling and laughing. So it's fairly common to have those. Also, those were recurring themes in the literature analysis, not only for the positive energy districts, but also for net zero energy communities or net zero energy districts. The main addition from the positive energy districts on let's say in those 6, the main addition in those 6 would be the social aspects that you will see that gains a little bit more importance compared to the previous iterations of this comprehensive district-wise projects or concepts. So that's how we developed them. We started from social economics and environmental, and then based on what we were reading and also a little bit of good practice and personal knowledge, we thought, well, environmental will need definitely energy efficiency and emissions, and we cannot definitely neglect those. And yes.
Okay, thank you, Luca. Barbara?
Oh, okay, it's already clear. Just one question. It was not clear to me in your presentation. You mentioned possible common barriers and facilitators. It was not clear to me what are these barriers and these facilitators. Is not the one that you put outside as the variable that mentioned Cedric before, or not?
Yeah. No, it's not in there. Absolutely, no, you're absolutely right. So they're not in there. There also were 5 minutes, and the paper is still in writing.
Because I was looking for this barrier.
No, you're absolutely right. So the objective was to find what's been done before with NZEC, for example, net zero energy communities or net zero energy districts or zero energy buildings and whatever and whatnot, and try to find out what made them not zero energy districts, or what made them unavailable to a large part of the population, or what made them impossible to develop, and trying to learn and draw some lessons from it. That would be the thing. In the presentation, no, we do not explain it. And honestly, from the literature review, there isn't a lot on positive energy districts because they're fairly new, and therefore the barriers are hidden, I will say. So when they try to make a positive energy districts, it's a little bit difficult to identify those barriers. It's kind of not too much talked about. So that is actually a section that we currently are struggling a little bit to write. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a stupid question. What is positive about positive energy districts? No, but what do they mean by positive? I actually don't know.
Yes, and that's why we started writing this paper, honestly. It was a question that we also asked ourselves. So the main positivity is about the energy balance. So the energy balance over a year should be positive.
That's okay.
That's not a great idea itself, and I agree. And that's why they have developed, in times I couldn't put it in the presentation, also 3 types of, no, I actually said it in the presentation, sorry. The outer positive energy districts, for example, that one should always produce more, not always, but it's kind of independent. So it can only export, it can never import from the grid or from any other energy system. The positivity is on that, according to someone, to some literature review we've done, the net zero energy district and positive energy districts have no difference, if not that the balance is positive. And some researchers or developers have found it a little bit easier to say, well, it's easier to overshoot the production rather than try to be balanced at zero, which wouldn't make much sense, of course. The production must be from renewable energy sources. Positive energy districts is also a little bit of a rebranding of net zero energy districts. So the positive part will go into the social aspects of inclusions and community as a whole. Like people living in a positive energy district will have a positive kind of life, quote unquote positive. Allow me the the word positive in that sense, and that the community will be positively engaged in the developing of the positive energy districts. And it's a little bit of a rebranding, of course, but it is supposed to be on the balance and on the social participation and inclusion and so on. So that's the main.
But there's a huge literature on microgrids, and for me, microgrids, would be the same as a energy district.
A microgrid could be a positive energy district or not. A microgrid is just a structure, like it's an infrastructure, right? It's a type of grid of city grid, like they do in the United States. That would be a microgrid, for example, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have achieved a positive balance per se. Like it could be a mean of achieving it. Like smart city are a mean of achieving positivity, but they're not the positive energy district themselves.
Okay. But from your literature review, it seems that positive energy districts aren't so well defined. So
no, that's the problem. That they are, centrally speaking, they are not very well defined. Like if you try to look for the definition given by the JRC, it's very vague, and you have to dig into the literature a little bit. And I think that's one of the, for now, one of the downfalls, because if I am from a city council, a municipality that it's not as big as a capital city or so much engaged as other cities, and many cities are not extremely engaged or have the capabilities of engaging themselves in such a project, not having a very structured way to approach it. I think it's detrimental, because then each municipality will understand it in its own way, and there is a risk that we actually don't do positive energy districts, or we end up doing gerrymandering of energy positive districts, and I think there is a risk there if it is not defined centrally, let's say, and left it like very open and sparse in the scientific literature.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Pierre-Olivier. Claire, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I surely do, actually. Actually, I have one question and one very strong recommendation. About the question, first of all, I'm very glad that I asked this right after your debate about microgrids and positive energy districts. One of you guys, I can't remember, made this very beautiful drawing. You were very proud of it in the video, showing the balance between what comes in, what comes out, right? So, okay, I guess it was Axel. Well, nevertheless, Axel, yes. I think that the main difference, not that I am expert, between the microgrid and the positive energy district is, in a microgrid, you also consider the infrastructure, right? The grid. Whether in a positive energy district, you're looking into the energy that you trade. And here comes my question. To what extent do you actually believe that having the spatial dimension, the district could be a city, whatever, is actually enabling anything, right? I mean, at the era of digitalization, peer-to-peer trading and all of that, why do you think it is so important to have this district or whatever scale to think about energy trading? So is it a facilitating or a hindering factor, actually? So that was my question. And then my strong suggestion. You had a very beautiful map in your presentation, blue and gray, if I remember correctly, of which Denmark was missing. And I know it is a very small country, but Danes are very proud. And I'm sure they would like it very much if they could be reintroduced into Europe.
No, that was the countries that have originally supported the JRC, JPI.
Yeah, but then Denmark was not there at all. There was no color for Denmark. It was white like the sea.
It was white like the sea? Really? Oh no, I'm so sorry. I've actually lived in Denmark for 4 years.
This is terrible. This is very terrible.
I'm very sorry. I am very sorry. Because that's weird. But anyway, that was the recommendation on Denmark, right? And the question was,
whether it makes sense to have a spatial dimension when we talk about trading energy at the era of digitalization.
Yes, That is a tough question. I think that the most it's done because you can plan a little bit more freely when you talk about a whole district rather than a single building. And by that, I mean that it's large enough to include in the balance different end users, but it's not that large that it becomes difficult to make that balance. And so I think it's just facilitating to match production and demand on a scale that it's easy enough to handle, but it's large enough to enable that matching. That is from people also that have worked in the set plan 3.2 words. So that's their opinion as well. The single building, you will be responsible for yourself and only trading without not caring enough of what is the possible matching with a close enough neighbor when you look at a single building. When you look at the city level, if the city is big enough, like it is Vienna, for example, it becomes very difficult to try to even do a balance of that kind. And that's where the district kind of try to ease up and be large enough to allow flexibility in the calculation, but small enough that doesn't get too complicated.
Thanks.
I don't know if there's quite the answer you wanted, but
that's yours.
No, can I add something, since you already referred to my painting in my presentation regarding the temporal thing? I think that it has downsides and positive sides. I think having a restricted spatial constraint has the downside of being like, in urban districts especially, you don't have enough space often to actually achieve a positive energy balance over a whole year if you constrain yourself to a spatial to those spatial boundaries. And you're right, like you can do this virtually. And this is also, there are these three, as Luca probably presented, there are these three different types of districts. Like the virtual district does not have these spatial boundaries, and it can include, for example, wind farms from outside of the district. And I think the positive thing of having the spatial borders is to help to not overstrain those urban grids, because there will be a race, like a growth in demand of power through electric vehicles. For example, fast charging will demand a lot of power, and they will strain the grid. And if the electricity could be directly generated in the urban area, maybe some of the strain on the grid could be reduced.
Yeah, but you also have a lot of redevelopment. When you do a redevelopment project, you don't do the redevelopment of a whole city as well. You try to contain it to a manageable size. And because we know that the building stock in Europe needs to be renovated as such, I think that's one of the main reasons to stick to a district. It's just trying to redevelop and restructure and retrofit the buildings and the districts, and you do it at a district level so that it doesn't explode into too much information. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we have to stop the discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Luca. So we could continue with the next speaker. So Yermone Sargsyan from Charles University.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much.
Hi. So Barbara, do you want to begin by your question?
Of course. Here I am. So a couple of questions. In your interesting analysis, you mention the access to electricity as a barrier or problem for children, and while in your estimation, in your regression, you use the number of outages. It's not exactly the same. You consider the same things, not the access and the interruption, for example, just one. And the second one, it's not clear to me, but maybe it's my problem, so I'm asking you to better explain me how an interruption in electricity service could affect the age and the weight of children. Where is the link between this? Because, for example, you in your regression, you use also labor, other control variables. I don't know what is exactly the relation between the dependent and the independent variable in this case.
Yeah, actually, first one, thank you very much for the question. First one is just clarification. Maybe this is my bad for the presentation. And the second one, very interesting question. Just let me quickly explain the first part. Usually literature, I find some paper for the Africa, let's say, and they're just checking if the household has the access to electricity or they don't. Whereas in our case, everyone has access to the electricity, but there is outages. I mean, in our research, we use this more than once a month, so several times a week, several times a month, or every day they have outages. So how these outages actually affecting their household? So in my research, how they are actually affecting the child health. So is there any link between these outages and the health of the children from 0 to 5 age? So in our case, we try to understand how the frequency of the outages actually affecting, not just household has access to electricity or they don't. Regarding the second question, is a very interesting question because actually we don't have any theoretical background on this part because there is not enough literature for this, but still we have literature about the health, and the main indicators for the health is the height and the weight. And for the child from 0 to 5 is like the most important thing. I mean, as a mom, I know that the first step, the doctor's office, they are just checking the weight and the height, right? This is like the first sign that everything is fine. So with the electricity, I mean, they cannot, let's say, if they don't have electricity, they cannot boil the water, they cannot have proper refrigeration of the food. So they need to consume the food that don't need that much refrigeration or etc. So it is not protein based or something. So I actually check also for the food the household consume, etc. So I also control for it, but it's not on the presentation that I sent it to you. So I guess how the electricity is affecting is, first thing is the infections that it is helping to reduce the infections that we have. And the second one is, of course, indoor air pollution, because in Kyrgyzstan and in a lot of countries, we see that for heating, let's say, they are using wood or they're using coal, etc., which highly increases the indoor air pollution, which of course affecting the children for that age. So there's a lot of other channels that I can claim, but of course there is not enough theoretical framework on this question.
Okay, thank you.
I'll continue with on the disruptions. You mentioned the frequency of electricity disruptions, but is there any additional indicator in terms of, you know, for how long? Is it like a total blackout for 5 minutes or for 5 hours?
Actually, that would be very great if we have this how long, but we don't have this data there. So actually, usually they are lasting on average, they are lasting for 3 or 4 hours, but this is not like some average number. So it's not like some, I don't have it for every household to check, you know, so.
the second question I had was, there's an indirect link between electricity quality of the service, the quality of service and health. But it's I'm not getting sick because directly my electricity supply is bad. There are other variables in between. So I would think what the disruption is more a proxy for something else that you can't measure. And I was wondering, if you had hypothesis on what actually was creating the health problem.
Well, actually, as you see, I guess I have fixed effect. So, and I also, I'm controlling for household fixed effect, and I'm controlling for year fixed effect. And I also control for the income of the household, and I also control for the other proxies, and I also control for the age of the child. So I try to control for everything, actually, as much as the data limitation is giving me the opportunity to control. Of course, in every research, you have this unobservable variables. I guess you can, so far I'm searching for good IV, but in my case, I guess the most interesting finding was that for the lower income group, they were more vulnerable. So when you have enough money, you can somehow substitute this effect of the outages. So you can somehow solve the problem. So it is not affecting your health that hard as for the household that has lower income. Okay, so this was the main finding, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Pierre-Olivier. Claire, do you want to ask a question?
Sure, actually, that's a follow-up question. So you're observing that there is a substitution effect, from not the poorest categories of people suffering the outages, and you're noticing that they can, bring about some solutions that limited those bad effects, right? But do you have a better visibility on what they do? So, for instance, do they actually or find an energy solution to the outages? So you mentioned earlier the use of biomass to warming up the place or whatever, so an energy solution. Or does that mean that this category of people actually spend more money into health solutions? Both would probably come up to the same outcome. So that was just a quick follow-up question. And another question I had for you was, what is for you the next step now that you have established this link? Do you intend to do some economic analysis on what is the cost for society, not further developing the electricity system, for instance? Do you plan to try to figure out what is the health costs derived from those outages? Or do you think that maybe incentivizing to more distributed generation might be part of the picture to improving the situation? Or so what are you going to do now that you've established this link? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting question. So an interesting idea to develop my research, actually. Well, of course, I'm going to work on the research to make it less biased, I guess, because so far we have this problem there. It depends on the data. They're still collecting the data in the Kyrgyzstan, the same data every 3 years. So we'll see if we have more data on health, of course, if I can develop it more. Regarding first question, let's say if they have enough income, they usually invest, and it is becoming quite popular in Kyrgyzstan. They usually invest in solar panels or to have some energy from solar. They have this small equipment there that gives them opportunity to, let's say, just charge their phones, or let's say if they are cooking bread and selling it. I mean, in this kind of countries, usually people are self-employed, so their income also depends on the electricity. So if, let's say, you are baking something at home, you usually install a small solar panel, and if, let's say, you see that in your region, you will have this problem with outages, you cannot afford to buy new equipment, because every time they have these outages, the equipment can lose the quality, etc., etc. This way, they are usually investing in solar energy, and they also have this wind energy in the country. But of course, this is not for the household, but government usually invest in this kind of the projects. For the households, of course, this is like coal, biomass fuel, and wood, which is quite cheap in the country. Was that the answer, or I missed some points on your question?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So I will close with two questions. I was wondering if it is relevant to include in your analysis, and I haven't seen it in your research fields, if is it relevant to include the results for high income sample? Okay, the high income sample.
Okay.
Is it relevant to include the results? Because just one thing, I assume that the outages will touch a low income and high income, and so have you these results to see or to calibrate your model, or to validate your model, to see if you have some counterintuitive estimators, for instance, or something like that?
Yeah, sure. I play with the data, with the high income guys, with the low income group. Of course, with the high income, the electricity don't have any significant impact. That's why I didn't show it on my presentation. But surely I checked for the high income too.
Yeah, and I have the second question in line with previous one and previous questions. The others member of the jury asked to you. I think you have a lot of variables, but who are correlated. So do you have a study the correlation between several variables? Because I think you have workers in households. These variables is correlated with the income, that is correlated with food expenditures. Yeah. And so I think you have a lot of variables that are correlated, and perhaps you could have, as Pierre-Olivier said to you, you could have some proxy, and so you could have some difficulties to catch some effects, perhaps. So.
Yeah, actually, sure. Food expenditure correlated with income. That's why, I mean, this is just one comment instead of I checked the correlation. It wasn't high, so that's why I included. I don't remember the exact number now, sorry, but I mean, I checked it for sure because this is the main question everyone is asking. That I'm using food expenditure because the income is not significant, and it was quite surprising for me why income is not significant for the health of the children. I guess because in this kind of surveys, sometimes people misreport their income, or we have some noise on our data. That's why I was have to think about the good proxies for the income, which is in my case is food expenditure and the number of adults in working age in that household. Usually in Kyrgyzstan, if a person is higher than 18, they usually find a job if they are not studying. So.
Okay, and the last question: do you try to evaluate your model without the income variable?
Without, sorry.
Do you
without what?
Try to evaluate your model without the income variable, because it is not significant. And does it change your results or no?
That's not.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. So thank you very much. So I think we could go to the last speaker of this session. So Minh.
Yes.
Hi.
Okay, I'll start.
Yeah, Olivier.
Yeah. Thank you for your poster on a very important topic. I'd like to just ask some questions on the survey. Who conducted the survey? Because you don't really give a lot of background on the survey, and how was electricity consumption measured? Because there is it's not only access to grid. It seems that consumption of electricity is also present. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes, survey, it's the National Household Survey, so it's conducted by the National Statistical Office. It's a periodic survey, and electricity consumption is measured by actually there were two questions on electricity consumption. One question about amount and one question about expense, but we used the question about expense because we think it's more likely that people remember.
Okay, the last question, your paper is very descriptive, so which is fine to some extent, but then would you think about additional research questions that you could try to investigate for the survey?
Yes. In the keynote this noon, we heard that electrification and bringing electricity to a village, it's not always efficient to raise people out of poverty. And yet, when we define indicators for Sustainable Development Goal 7, we use electrification rate. So I think the theoretical lesson from our work is that the better indicator is a subjective indicator. Instead of looking at electrification rate, you look at the people who declare that their consumption of electricity has been satisfying for their needs. And the subjective approach, even through only 2 indicators out of 150 for the Sustainable Development Goals are subjective, but a subjective indicator, it answers lots of problems that objective indicators have.
Okay, thank you. We can move on to more questions.
So Claire.
Yes. Hello. I've got a little clarification question and a curiosity here. You presented this slide, with the bubbles, right? Outlining the overlap between this economic indicator engineering and this what people actually declare like a proxy of their satisfaction or their unmet need. And this big bubble was about the limited access, and the bracket, between bracket, you had below 30 kilowatt per hour, and then you had unmet need. But what is the difference actually? What do you mean by limited access below 30 kilowatt hour? Does that mean that your connection capacity at 30 kilowatt per hour is too little to actually fulfill all of your needs? And if yes, then what is the unmet need?
Access is limited by grid, but not much in Vietnam. So mostly access is limited by poverty, and they just cannot afford the appliances. on the electricity bill. So that's what access under 30 kilowatt hour is.
Okay.
In the research. So the point of this graph was to show that the most common criteria to define electricity poverty is people spend a high share of their income on the electricity bill. And I think this graph shows very well that it doesn't intersect at all the rest of the two other criteria. So because actually the people who spend a lot of money on the electricity bill, sometimes they are rich.
And I was curious about something. There was this slide where you showed the map of Vietnam. I think showing the results of the survey, and the first map was very red and the other map was very white, showing an improvement of the situation between 2010 and today. What happened? What are the good practices and how can they be replicated?
So the map shows that the satisfaction with electricity improved a lot in 2010, and I think that's simply a quality of service. There were less a more reliable supply. So in Vietnam, the electricity supply and the demand is increasing like by 10% per year. So if I have one or two coal power plants that are late, then it's a big deal, especially at this time. So I think in 2010, what increased was the quality of supply, and you could rely on electricity, not 24 hours, but at least 20 hours. And so the interplay between this and people buy appliances, it makes people declare that their electricity consumption satisfies their need.
Okay.
And yeah.
So basically, big investment happened on the grid and the supply side.
On the supply side, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So I have two questions. One correlated with the previous one. In Vietnam, you have a long country, so I think it is difficult to obtain a mesh network. So when you talk about the increase of reliability, so and to supply energy services and to increase the satisfaction of consumers, you talk about urgent investments in production and in consumption. In production, because if you have some congestions between the north and the south, you could have a loss in reliability, and I think it could occur several times. So I think you could have a hedge investment in the north and in the south. Is it the case?
Yes, it's a case that it's difficult to manage the power flow. Traditionally, it's a power flow between the north to the south. And now, since this year, because we installed like 25% of the system capacity in solar in just 2 years, we are going to have to oversupply in the south. And so in the next 10 years, unless they manage to have we managed to have auctions to land renewable energy in the north. We are going to reverse the situation. So yes, the completion of the 500 kilovolt line was a big accomplishment, and the unification of the network, because traditionally the network was managed in 3 different zones: the north, the south, and the center. And it's only quite recently that they unified the network, and it contributed also to increasing the supply.
Okay.
But now we have big curtailment issues.
Yes, I see. So my second question, you show that an increase in the percentage of energy bills in revenue. So 4 or 8% in memory. And you show that it comes with an increase in reliability. So if I correctly remember. And so I have only this question, is there a strong link between this increase in energy costs or energy share in income and reliability, or do you not observe a lot of link or proportionality between these two variables?
So you're asking me if investment is financed by the households, and well, the burden of electricity price is disproportional on households compared to industry and services. So the households pay a bit more, but in absolute terms, the price of electricity has decreased. It has increased slower than inflation. So, in fact, the share of the electricity bill is increasing in the budget of households because it substitutes for other kind of energy, traditional biomass that was non-commercial. And so electricity is a luxury good for households above a certain level of income. Essential for the poor, but like when you can have a 100 kilowatt hour or even 50 kilowatt hour, the income elasticity becomes positive.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, you begin to ask your question and you close by your question.
Okay, so a curiosity, in your presentation, you conclude that energy poverty is mainly a matter of social dimension, if I rightly understand. But before, you say that there has been a huge increase in the energy bill during the last, I think, 5 or 10 years. So how did you combine these two results? So how could it be the energy poverty just or mainly a problem, a social problem, a social perception, if on the other hand, the price of the total expenditure for month for energy has increased so dramatically? How could it be the economic aspect so underestimated?
Well, I argue in favor of the subjective indicator of energy poverty because it's very much neglected. Of course, the real situation is that you learn something by looking at the engineering, you learn something by looking at the economics, and you learn something by looking at the subjective satisfactions. And I show in my paper that you learn different things, but the three indicators are not at all at the same for the same households. But the energy bill is increasing, and that's because people choose to expend more money on electricity. Electricity is progress, and they are happy to enjoy the services, the modern services of cleaner cooking, lighting with electricity. It's much better than lighting with petrol. And enjoying cell phone. So yes, people are spending more on electricity because they are getting richer. And at this point, I don't say that if they go above 10% or 15%, of course, at some point there may be a problem. And already during the heat wave, which is every year in Hanoi or everywhere, you see in the newspaper situation of the poor people who cannot afford to have cooling even by the fan. Cooling by AC, it remains a luxury. So, and cooling by the fan, if you cannot afford, then that's a problem. But it's anecdotal evidence that makes the news. It's not a general situation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you, Minh. So I think we could close the session. So I apologize. I'm not very good as the master of time. So, but I usually I don't want to stop the discussion because I found them very interesting. So thank you very much to all the speakers, and I want to congratulate you for the quality of your researches. Thank you very much, and congratulations, and thank you to the jury for asking all these very interesting questions. So I think we could stop here the session. Thank you to Jean-Pierre for the technical support for
I'll stop recording then.
for the session. Thank you. And